Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to be coding out the solutions for the game project, that tic-tac-toe project from the previous lecture. Hopefully you had a chance to attempt it on your own, but if not, feel free to code along with me right now. I'm going to hop over to my editor and browser to get started. Okay, here I am at my editor, and here's the browser, and I have three files open: an empty HTML file, an empty CSS file, and an empty JavaScript file. So we're ready to really tackle the front end and see its capabilities with this little project of ours. Let's start off by creating the HTML file and filling out the actual content. Then we'll style it, and then we'll actually add the interactivity with JavaScript. Going to type HTML there. Just to set it up, we have tic-tac-toe, and let's actually link our CSS file. So I'm going to link right now to my CSS file, which I've just called game.css, and then I'm also going to link to Bootstrap. That way I can use the Jumbotron later. All you have to do that is come to getbootstrap.com, and then I can just scroll down here and grab the latest compiled and minified CSS, copy and paste that line into my file, and let's check that we're ready to go by just putting a heading in here saying connected. Let's make sure that font looks good. Refresh our page, and here we have connected in Bootstrap font, so we know we're good to go. Okay, so far my links are okay. And I also want to link to my script. Let's just do that over here at the bottom. So all the way at the bottom, I'm going to call script, and we're going to make the source equal to my script, which is called myscript.js. We'll save that, and to verify that's connected, I'm going to do a console log that says connected. Save that. We'll refresh this page, and then let's inspect view the console. Let me expand this just so we can see it. And it says connected, so we're good to go there. Fantastic. Now we need to create some HTML content to actually create the board. Let's comment this out, and then coming back to main, let's expand this. First thing we wanted to do is, since we're dealing with Bootstrap, create a div tag that contains the class container. So this will have the container class, and then inside of this, I'm going to create the Jumbotron. Then we'll have a heading inside this Jumbotron that says, "Welcome to tic-tac-toe, tic-tac-toe." And we can put a paragraph in here if we want. It says, "Get ready to play." Let's save this and refresh, make sure it actually looks good. Okay, welcome tic-tac-toe, get ready to play. And then finally, let's add a button. Remember, we had that restart button. So I will call a button tag, and then it will have the type button. The name button's fine, but let's give it a class. In the class, we are going to just reference Bootstrap for this. So I wouldn't expect you to have this memorized. I would expect you to reference the documentation. But the class I chose was btn, and then I also added the btn primary to it. And then I wanted to make the button large, so I added btn lg. So basically what's happening here is this class tells it it's a Bootstrap button. This tells it it's a primary Bootstrap button, so that takes care of the coloring. And this takes care of the sizing, btn large. Let me save this, and let's also add what we want the button to say. So let's have it say something like restart. And we could put this on multiple lines if we wanted to. I'll just keep it on one line. I'm pretty zoomed in right now, but let's refresh. And here we have restart. I can click on it, nothing's happening, but it's all working the way we want it to so far. Now, let's continue on. Something to think about at this stage is I will probably want to reference this button later on in my JavaScript. Since it's the only button on the page, let's just give it an ID. We could also call it by its tag, but I like calling things by their ID. So let's give it the ID B, so I can call it later. And what we're going to do is add in the table that's going to represent our board. We're going to add in the table, and then we'll have to style it to actually make it look like a board. So let's continue on with that. I'm going to put this inside of the container, but outside of the Jumbotron. So let's expand that. So here we are now inside the container, but outside the Jumbotron. I'm going to call a table, and I'm going to say my table has align equal to center. And then inside of this, I have 3 table rows. So we'll say tr, and inside of each row, there's going to be 3 cells. So td, and we'll leave them blank for now. td, leave that one blank, and then td, leave that one blank. And now let's do this 2 more times. You can just copy and paste. And if we save this, we should have our table right here. But you'll notice there's actually nothing showing up, and that's because we have no styling attached to this table. So let's come over to the .css script and actually give some styling so we make sure that we're actually seeing this table. I'm going to give styling to the actual table cells, the TD, and let's give it a height of 150 pixels. And these values are pretty arbitrary, so you could have put whatever you wanted. I'll also give it a width of 150 pixels, so they're squares. I'm going to text align center, and the reason for that is when I put an X or an O inside of the actual cell, I want it to be center aligned. And then let's give it a border. This will allow us to see it. We'll say 5 pixel solid black border. And then let's give it a font size of 100 pixels. And again, this font size refers to when I'm actually going to be inputting X's and O's. So let's save this. We'll refresh over here. And now I see my tic-tac-toe board. Great. And let's practice manually putting in an X over here. So let's put an X into the very first table cell. Save this, refresh, and there's my X. And it's text aligned centered, which is exactly what we wanted. Great. Hopefully you were able to get this far with very few difficulties. I know it may look kind of daunting when you see just what the browser, but on the HTML and CSS side, it's definitely everything that we've done before, and it's pretty straightforward. Now, what might not be so straightforward, especially since we're just learning it, is the actual JavaScript code to manipulate the document object model to play the game. So let's get started on that. I'm going to have a few sections. I'll have the restart game button. Then I'll have some sort of section that grabs all the squares. Then I also want some sort of function that can clear all the squares. And then I want to create a function that will check the square marker. So something like check the square marker, so check if it's an X or an O. And then finally, I want some sort of for loop to add event listeners to all the squares. Okay, so those are the main tasks we have to do in our JavaScript code, and I'm going to approach this in the next lecture. That way you can spend some time to review the HTML and CSS. In the next lecture, we'll actually code out all this JavaScript. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you there.